realities that we had agreed upon that were smashed by science, transforming the way we understood ourselves. We used to think we were separate from the other animals, and then we realized that we were descended from apes, you know? And then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology.
Well, now we shall have to redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans.
Find their own way. You know, we can help them, but we can't do it for them.
It seems to me on that point that members of your administration often seem acutely aware of sort of the idea of limits to American power, maybe to a greater extent than they always feel comfortable articulating publicly.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to say in the political and media system that there are things you can't really do?
Well,
we can also track those changes over time on Wikipedia, and we can create our own wikis, because at their core, they're just a data infrastructure. On Wikipedia, it's an open platform that stores words and images and the changes to that data over time. On the blockchain, you can think of it as an open infrastructure that stores many kinds of assets. It stores the history of custodianship, ownership, and location for assets like the digital currency Bitcoin, other digital assets like a title of ownership of IP. It could be a certificate, a contract, real-world objects, even personal identifiable information.
And that we are always adding in a little more flour and a little more water and folding it in and turning it over and never getting around to baking it. If my obsession was eternal life, Navid's obsession was touch. She had a genius for it. All of her work revolved around it. My body was like a canvas for her, and she would draw her fingertip down over my face so slowly that I couldn't feel it moving. And she was obsessed with the exact moment when I would stop being able to tell the difference between her body and mine. Or she would just lie across me and dig her shoulder into mine and say,
in order to live the lives that we say we want to live. In 1915, on the eve of one of the great suffrage demonstrations down Fifth Avenue in New York City, a writer in New York wrote an article in a magazine. And the title of the article was Feminism for Men. And this was the first line of that article. Feminism will make it possible for the first time for men to be free. Thank you.
So when we look at why it is that Pixar is actually able to do what it does, we have to ask ourselves, what's going on here? For sure, history, and certainly Hollywood, is full of star-studded teams that have failed. Most of those failures are attributed to too many stars, or too many cooks, if you will, in the kitchen. So why is it that Pixar, with all of its cooks, is able to be so successful time and time again? When we studied an Islamic bank in Dubai, or a luxury brand in Korea, or a social enterprise in Africa, we found that innovative organizations are communities that have three capabilities: creative abrasion, creative agility, and creative resolution.
And you have obstacles in front of you, as we all do. None of us ever get through this life without heartache, without turmoil. And if you believe and you have faith, and you can get knocked down and get back up again, and you believe in perseverance as a great human quality, you find your way. And Bonnie grabbed my shoulders and she said, let's find our way to Florida. And we started, and for the next 53 hours, it was an intense, unforgettable life experience. The highs were high, the awe. I'm not a religious person, but I tell you, to be in the azure blue of the Gulf Stream, as if as you're breathing.
Surely we can tap into that kind of talent and tools to stop babies dying in the poor world. If we did, then every parent would have the confidence to name their child the moment that child is born, daring to dream that that child's life will be measured in decades, not days. Thank you.
Again, his name was Paulie, and we worked together many times, and we became good friends. I want to believe that Paulie was right. We are going to be okay. But in our effort to reconfigure how we as a species exist on this planet, we must include and take account of all the costs, including the very real human cost of the labor. And we also would be well informed to reach out to the people who do that work and get their expertise on how do we think about, how do we create systems around sustainability that perhaps takes us from curbside recycling, which is a remarkable success across 40 years across the United States and countries around the world, and lift us up to a broader horizon where we're looking at
we implant some mammalian cells, which you can see in blue, and what happens is these guys start multiplying and they fill up this entire scaffold. Now, as weird as this is, it's actually really reminiscent of how our own tissues are organized. And we found in our preclinical work that you can implant these scaffolds into the body, and the body will send in cells and a blood supply and actually keep these things alive. This is the point when people started asking me, Andrew, can you make body parts out of apples? And I'm like, you've come to the right place. So I actually brought this up with my wife. She's a musical instrument maker, and she does a lot of wood carving for a living. And so I asked her, could you literally carve some ears out of an
We had a chance to visit many of the Inuit communities in Greenland that now face huge challenges. The locals spoke to me of vast areas of sea ice that are no longer freezing over as they once did, and without ice, their hunting and harvesting grounds are severely diminished, threatening their way of life and survival. The melting glaciers in Greenland are one of the largest contributing factors to rising sea levels, which have already begun to drown some of our world's lowest-lying islands. 1 year after my trip to Greenland, I visited the Maldives, the lowest and flattest country in the entire world. While I was there, I collected images and inspiration for a new body of work, drawings.
But we only get one history, and it's the one that we have, but this particular reality was not inevitable. The tiniest perturbation of that asteroid far from Earth would have caused it to miss our planet by a wide margin. The pivotal calamitous day during which the dinosaurs were wiped out, setting the stage for the modern world as we know it, didn't have to be. It could have just been another day. A Thursday, perhaps. Among the 63 billion days already enjoyed by the dinosaurs. But over geological time, improbable, nearly impossible events do occur along the path from our wormy Cambrian ancestors to primates dressed in suits. Innumerable forks in the road led us to this very particular reality. The bones of Dreadnoughtus lay underground for 70
decided that this is an assumption which we can test. And that's where she had this really ingenious idea to take head measurements of a group of people who were, in fact, anatomists meeting at a conference in Dublin. And she found that there was a group with big heads and a group with small heads. And the very smallest of them all was, in fact, the most distinguished of the anatomists. Everybody agreed.
It's quite bold, isn't it, walking into
Yes.
a conference and measuring the head sizes and essentially challenging these great men of science to say, well, your assumptions do not match the data.
Well, I think she had a lot of support, especially from her supervisor, Carl Pearson. But she remained a low-paid assistant all her life. Still, she did get a publication.
An example of that would be that we have a partnership with Backpacker Magazine, and I was able to help them co-create some online outdoor skills classes. And I got to help write the curriculum and do the filming of these classes. And that was something I never even knew that Outward Bound did on a regular basis. And then stepping into a more office and supportive type of role, I was able to be an active member of that project. Because I've only been in my job for 1 year, I don't know a whole lot about how potential increases of my salary are going to work. I think that in the future, my salary might be structured differently because my job has a sales focus to it. I do have a little bit of a commission, and that I've included in my salary.
That gave people a level of confidence that we were going to get.
And the firm has done spectacularly since then.
So I think we are the only firm, and I said I look at us more as a services company than a financial services company, but we are the only firm that has done better post-financial crisis than pre. If you're a major bank, there is no way that you're doing better than you did pre-financial crisis because the whole world has changed.
So let's finish up with and talk a little bit about your view, because you see globally, but in globally activity, and obviously a lot in America. Do you agree with Austin's sort of structural comments about the economy, growth rate? Are you more optimistic than he was, about the same? Do you have a difference in view?
Contribute to our society. We would divert more of our resources, scarce resources, more of our talents, to the kind of entrepreneurial activities, innovative activities that Americans have, and into activities that would create jobs. And that would make our economy more competitive globally, and that would create a stronger economy here at home.
My conversation with Joseph Stiglitz will continue next week. Corporations and their CEOs aren't the only ones raking in profits by wiggling through a tax loophole.
I don't really know what We Are the World accomplished. I'm sure it accomplished some things, but it seemed more just like this odd excuse for a bunch of public figures to get together in a room and, I don't know, almost like spit in the ocean of unconquerable, terrible circumstance.
Whether it was in response to Haiti or in response to the tsunami in Southeast Asia, these moments of a unifying global consciousness, they really seem fleeting.
Not to sort of take the, I don't know, almost like Marshall McLuhan meta view of it, but it seems like it says more about media and semiotic theory than about the events themselves. What I mean by that is, and I don't want to be glib,
we will figure out some of the proteins on tumor cells that can be attacked just as you would attack a virus or a bacterium. We're not there yet. When I think of vaccines, what does vaccines mean? It means you're trying to prevent a disease. Well, there are a lot of ways to prevent cancer or to treat cancer. I like to think, though, of making cancer a chronic disease rather than focus just on curing cancer. Think about HIV/AIDS, for example, as an analogy. So HIV/AIDS was converted from a lethal disease into a chronic disease because basic scientists, fundamental research was done that illuminated aspects of that virus and allowed the generation of therapies like antiretroviral.
Phases or types of quantum matter. We know if we have a quantum system of many particles, the particles want to be entangled with one another, and completely describing their correlations is again something that we couldn't possibly do with our classical computer. So there are possible phases or states of quantum matter which we can't very well anticipate or imagine because they're so far beyond what we normally think about. And so I think we're going to see new types of quantum matter in materials that physicists are going to design and realize. And I'm also expecting there to be implications of quantum information ideas in gravity.
If you haven't, please start. We are created for so much more. Don't miss your opportunity. Spread Christ's love and grace throughout your community. If you've accepted His free gift, then you've already won. Now spread that truth with others till the day He says, "Well done."
Period, we find that 35%, more than 1/3 of Americans, will be poor at least once for 2 months or more. That's lesson 1. Since Vista's founding, we've learned that poverty is widespread. It's a much more common experience than we thought it was then. Poverty is not something that happens to them. It's something that will happen to lots of us. That's important, I think, in part, because perhaps if people cannot be mobilized to fight poverty for altruistic reasons, maybe they might be mobilized for selfish ones. It's also a way to highlight one of the virtues of Vista's key program features. Because Vistas earn a poverty-level stipend, perhaps it's easier for them to think of people struggling to get by with limited resources.
As well. And we try to use one of these phones from time to time to keep in touch with their reality. So, what does it mean to design at a global scale? It means difficult and sometimes exasperating work to try to improve and evolve products. Finding the audacity and the humility to do right by them can be pretty exhausting. And the humility part, it's a little tough on the design ego. Because these products are always changing, everything that I've designed in my career is pretty much gone, and everything that I will design will fade away. But here's what remains: the never-ending thrill of being a part of something that is so big you can hardly get your head around it, and the promise that it just might change the world. Thank you.
Psychological connection in our lives between the way we experience great failure and the way we experience great success. So think of it like this. For most of your life, you live out your existence here in the middle of the chain of human experience where everything is normal and reassuring and regular. But failure catapults you abruptly way out over here into the blinding darkness of disappointment. Success catapults you just as abruptly, but just as far, way out over here into the equally blinding glare of fame and recognition and praise. And one of these fates is objectively seen by the world as bad, and the other one is objectively seen by the world as good. But your subconscious is completely incapable of discerning the difference between bad and good. It is capable of feeling is the absolute value of this emotional equation, the exact distance that you have been flung from yourself.
They bombard you. We see on average 2,000 ads a day. They're trying to sell you something. Luxury comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of killing your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions. So toughen up a little bit. Be a stoic. When's the last time you went a week without eating sugar? Or walked instead of taking a car to get groceries? Or did 100 push-ups? Or turned the air conditioning off? Toughen yourself up. Take a cold shower. You see, everybody wants, but not everybody's willing to toughen up to get the good life. You must toughen up. So, in closing, I'll share with you my favorite poem, Chief Tecumseh. He says, love your life.
Or signs that we aren't coping very well with the pressure. But what if you viewed them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response changed. Now, in a typical stress response, your heart...
The eternal, timeless, and limitless self that we all are. And when we lose touch with that, we start looking for ourselves in the reflections of the world around us. People and approval and standards of whatever's popular at the time. But even though we look, we never feel satisfied or grounded or at ease, somehow artificial and insecure. So when we connect with that breath and we remember, which actually means to bring back into, remember, become part of that breath, that self, we begin to feel as though we're entering into integrity and wholeness.
We understand that many of our citizens are frustrated by the pace of globalization and feel they're not experiencing the benefits of international trade. We both believe this is an issue that we as G20 leaders cannot afford to ignore. Instead, we must all work together to spur economic growth, to boost free trade, and build a fairer economy that truly works for all.
Thank you. So we're going to take a couple of questions, starting with Andrew Beattie of AFP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I had a question on Syria, first of all. It seems like there's a deal with the Russians within reach. I was wondering, do you not think there's a risk that there's another short-lived agreement that doesn't end the war, but which allows the Russians to deflect criticism at the G20 here and at the UN General Assembly? And secondly,
it's this idea that succumb, to surrender, to dive in, to lose ourselves. There's something kind of beautiful.
Fate, we don't think of ourselves as that vehicle to success. And this story has a very unique way of uncovering that specific truth. We get from the world what we invest in ourselves. Right? The patience, the daily work, commitment, focus, all these things that transform us, unlock even the toughest doors. Because piecing together the world you want is an impossible task if you haven't created your ideal self first, if you haven't built yourself up every day, making yourself a little better, a little stronger. In the same sense that piece by piece, bricks become walls, that become houses, that become cities, that proceed to make up our reality.
Our experience? Does language structure how we see the world? Does culture dictate who we become? Are we molded and shaped by the unfolding dynamics of interfacing with our environment? Again, this is sometimes known as epigenetics, how literally things that happen to you during your formative years can transform how your genetic structure is expressed. Experience can change biology, okay? But recently this debate has taken on new heights because some of the new science, there's an article called The Social Life of Genes which talked about this, which said that the idea of epigenetics actually goes much farther and that experience throughout our lives affects our genetic expression. And the doctor, the researcher quoted in the piece actually had the best way to describe it. He basically says that our cells that compose our bodies are
a second story over the picture that we see in front of us all the time. Fear is writing that script. Now fear is going to be a player in your life, but you get to decide how much. You can spend your whole life imagining ghosts, worrying about the pathway to the future, but all there will ever be is what's happening here, and the decisions we make in this moment, which are based in either love or fear. So many of us choose our path out of fear disguised as practicality. What we really want seems impossibly out of reach and ridiculous to expect, so we never dare to ask the universe for it. I'm saying that you can ask the universe for it. Life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. As far as I can tell, it's just about letting the universe know.
And we have to do everything we can for those families and honor them and be humbled by them. You know, DAV, I know that your service has also been defined by another battle. This is a group that understands sacrifice. You've been defined by the battle here at home. You've been defined by the battle here at home to persevere through wounds and disabilities. I think of a veteran from Iraq who lost her arm, but who said she decided to focus not on what I had lost, but on what I still had. I see that same spirit in you.
Make us visible. The entrepreneurs don't know we exist.
Fair enough.
Most of our grantors don't give us money for marketing, so we're not very visible. Secondly, they said, hey, we don't know what each other does. We don't know if we're all doing the same thing. We'd like to make good client referrals to people that can help them, but we don't know who each other are. So can you help us figure that out? The third thing they said is, we want to deliver the programs that the entrepreneurs need. Can you tell us where the gaps are in services to entrepreneurs? The fourth was, we need more money. Can you help us raise money for our own organization?
That seems like a common
Yeah,
one.
and the last one was, can you help us measure economic impact? Because the only way that we will raise additional funds is if we know that we're making a difference in the community. So those were the 5 tenets that we started our little network of entrepreneurial support organizations with.
So would it be safe?
You fancy seeing what we did, you could go there. Another thing that we added to it towards the end of the project was initially a marketing tool, but it's kind of taken a life of its own, in that we were collecting stories from people on Twitter and then using Instagram to make short movies of their stories to kind of illustrate what we would be doing on stage, and then tweeting the link to the movie back to people. So there are people who get their own little bespoke little movies. And initially we thought, okay, we'll kind of try and get people in the area of the theatre to do this in the weeks leading up to the event. It didn't kind of work like that. Again, venues don't quite understand what we're trying to do at the moment. So what we ended up with doing is making movies for people.
This shapes how we think about our health, our relationships, how we decide how to vote, what we consider fair or ethical. And what's most scary to me about motivated reasoning or soldier mindset is how unconscious it is. You know, we can think we're being objective and fair-minded and still wind up ruining the life of an innocent man. However, fortunately for Dreyfus, his story is not over. This is Colonel Picquart. He was another high-ranking officer in the French army, and like most people, he assumed Dreyfus was guilty. Also, like most people in the army, he was at least casually anti-Semitic. But at a certain point, Picquart began to suspect, what if we're all wrong about Dreyfus? And what happened was that he had discovered evidence that the spying for Germany had continued even after Dreyfus was in prison.
So I feel like we have to pair that with like a degree of optimism and a degree of kind of like forward-propelling motion so that we can actually have some sort of say in the way that things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a conversation about science fiction literature with a friend, and he was just like, it's 95% dystopian.
Yeah.
You know? And this wasn't always the case. If you look back to the 60s, people are writing these books envisioning a totally different and less grim history or future. And like, what does that mean if our imagination is already kind of shrunken? And so it's, of course, exciting to think about electronic music, contemporary artwork's role in, expanding the possibilities. And I guess that brings me to the question of, you began with talking about the way in which both the club and the academy have their sort of unspoken rule.
And problems, and when we look for solutions in politics and in democracy, we are faced with political institutions designed 400 years ago. Autonomous, sovereign nation states with jurisdictions and territories separate from one another, each claiming to be able to solve the problem of its own people. 21st century, transnational world of problems and challenges, 17th century world of political institutions. In that dilemma lies the central problem of democracy. And like many others, I've been thinking about what can one do about this asymmetry between 21st century challenges.
Function. Without it, we literally can't interface with others. We can't hatch plans and climb that stairway of popularity, of success. But my skin color wasn't right. My hair wasn't right. My history wasn't right. Myself became defined by otherness, which meant that in that social world, I didn't really exist. And I was other before being anything else, even before being a girl. I was a noticeable nobody. Another world was opening up around this time. Performance and dancing. That nagging dread of selfhood didn't exist when I was dancing. I'd literally...
And I said, why are we doing breath-holding exercises? And my coach looked at me and he said, Melody, that was not a breath-holding exercise. That drill was to make you comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how most of us spend our days. If we can learn to deal with our discomfort and just relax into it, we'll have a better life. So I think it's time for us to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation about race. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, male, female, all of us. If we truly believe in equal rights and equal opportunity in America, I think we have to have real conversations about this issue. We cannot afford to be colorblind. We have to be color brave. We have to be willing.
So our team at the VA went out, we looked at the data, we talked to veterans themselves, and we started simple and small with the two most important services that matter most to them: education benefits and disability benefits. I'm proud to say that they are live on the site today, and as the team continues to streamline more services, they will be ported over here and the old sites will be shut down. To me, this is what change looks like in 2016. Now, when you walk out of the Oval Office the first time I was ever there, I noticed a quote the president had embroidered on the rug. It's the classic JFK quote. It says, "No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings." It's true. We have the tools to solve these problems. We have the
But we have technology that can look into that world as well. With high-speed cameras, we can do the opposite of time-lapse. We can shoot images that are thousands of times faster than our vision. And we can see how nature's ingenious devices work. And perhaps we can even imitate them. When a dragonfly flutters by, you may not realize, but it's the greatest flyer in nature. It can hover, fly backwards, even upside down. And by tracking markers on an insect's wings, we can visualize the airflow that they produce. Nobody knew the secret
that we had for each other because we loved each other so much. Her dying, it unlocked my mind to begin to think of possibility in my own life. And the best way I know how to explain this is there was something about knowing that at one moment I had a family, I had my mother, and then I lost everything. And I realized life changed pretty rapidly, for the worst, but life changed. Life can change. And I was inspired by this belief that my life could in fact change. And with that thinking in mind, I remember knocking on doors in high schools. I'd dust myself off after sleeping on the train. I'd knock on doors at high schools after years of being truant. And I would ask them to accept me. I should have been applying to college. I was applying to high school. That's how old I was. And I was knocking on doors asking for them to accept me. And I went from school to school.
Number one, we get to start to work on the next 2 billion and be the solution that we've seen so much of in the past and we need to see more of in the future. That's what we get. And the second is that we might just be able to take the ghastly holy war of ideology that we're suffering under in this country and turn it into a competition of ideas based on solidarity and mutual respect. And then, maybe, just maybe, we'll all realize that our big differences aren't really that big after all. Thank you.
We never got his cat.
We just need a Congress that works as hard as you do. At the very least, we should expect that they should do their jobs and protect us from disease, help us recover from disaster, keep the Supreme Court above politics, and help our businesses grow and hire. So, if any of these priorities matter to you, let your congressperson know. And if they still refuse to do their jobs, well, you know what to do in November. Our government only works as well as the people we elect, and that's entirely up to you. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Of a public education system. So we have adopted these approaches, and I think I had several concerns about Senator Sanders' program. I thought that it was hard to justify claiming it was free when it was going to have to be paid for by state governments, and by a lot of state governments, up to a third of the cost, that were not particularly well known for supporting higher education. In fact, they'd been disinvesting. And I think it's more important that we incentivize reinvestment in public higher education. So rather than holding out the promise of free college, which wasn't really free, it was going to be paid.
Happening right before our eyes, we know we've got a lot of work to do. And so today, we reaffirm our belief that in the 21st century, no child should go to bed hungry, and no child should die from a mosquito bite, and no one should be denied opportunity because of where they're born or what gender or religion they are, or the color of their skin, or who they love. All of us are born equal, and we're all connected. And if a schoolhouse door is closed to a young girl, then we're all diminished. And when a mother can't buy medicine for her sick child, or a family flees violence, whether in Syria or El Salvador, in a sense that makes us all poor and all less secure. That's what we believe. That's what brings us here together.
So we did that. We diverted the water away from the house into these sponge-like basins with mulch and vegetation, which would rapidly absorb it. And then in times of no rain, we redirected our household gray water, that once used wash water from the showers, laundry, or sinks, to the landscape, turning that wastewater into another free resource water. And this way we found that all we needed to grow the vegetation that would shade, shelter, and beautify the house was the water draining from the house. And this enabled us to break a needless addiction, ubiquitous across the US. So it turns out that the average single-family household in the US consumes 30 to 50% of its drinking.
We don't like to seem like we don't know what we're talking about. So we would rather make something up or nod along quietly instead of learning to say 3 simple words. I don't know. It can be the most liberating phrase you ever learn. Have the courage to admit what you don't know, so that the next time you're out and you hear someone speaking another language, or you're going through your roster and you're trying to pick out someone by name alone, or you meet a child that doesn't look like his or her caregiver, take a breath, challenge.
Wow, thank you. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on Aboriginal land and recognise the strength, resilience and capacity of the Noongar people in this land. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders both past and present. Good afternoon, Vice-Chancellor Professor Deborah Terry, Acting Chancellor Ms Sue Wilson, members of the University Council, distinguished guests, faculty members, graduates and your friends and families, my mum Glenys, my sister Tegan and dads. Happy Father's Day. It's an absolute joy to be here today to celebrate alongside you the end of one adventure and the beginning of another. It is also a great privilege to have been awarded the Honorary Doctorate of Letters by the Council of Curtin University of Technology as the university celebrates its 50th year of innovation.
These aren't questions to which we can give definitive answers. And these paintings are, I think, deliberately inconclusive. They leave us in an ambiguous place, one step removed, wondering if we can ever cross the threshold and see the vision for ourselves.
Filters and we extrude it in the form of space shuttles and iPhones. You know, the Imaginary Foundation tells us that what imagination does is it allows us to conceive of delightful future possibilities, pick the most amazing one, and pull the present forward to meet it. You know, imagine how impoverished this world would have been if we hadn't invented the technology of the oil painting in time for Van Gogh, or the technology of the musical instrument in time for Beethoven and Mozart to unfurl through it. You know, with the revolutions in biotechnology, nanotechnology, the free exchange of information is allowing us to conceive of radical new things. Freeman Dyson says, in the future, new generation of artists will be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses. What is great in man, said Nietzsche, is that he is a bridge and not an end. You know, we're on a trajectory smack in the middle between the born and the made.
Community in the New South Wales community is
We can spur innovation and help make our economy more competitive. We know the choice that's right for America. We need to do what we've always done, put our ingenuity and can-do spirit to work to fight for a brighter future. Thanks.
Because we all know the more problems you solve for others, the more income you create, right? And the having shows up in different ways. It's not just monetary, it's not just stuff, it's memories, right? Being the right person, doing the right thing, adding more memories every day, every week, wins, etc., little ones, big ones, all this stuff under the sun, which at the end of the day, it's just making up the dash of my life. Do you know the poem, The Dash? If you haven't read it, you should Google it. The Dash is basically a poem about the dash between the day you were born and the day you die. And it's just a beautiful piece of work, unfortunately read usually during a very sad moment. But when you begin to realize that your life...
The roads we choose in life shape our world. Therefore, we travel. Some people think that riding is about freedom, gasoline, speed, adventures, and taking you where life leads. The truth is more simple than that. It's about fun. A state of mind generated by constant movement is our return. The wind in our faces leaves us no alternative but to live in the moment. No future.
If we all thought exactly the same. It's good that minds aren't like each other. It gives the world its ideas, its colour. So be kind to the autistic mind, the mind that's a slightly different kind.
We used to think, all these like erroneous consensus realities that we had agreed upon that were smashed by science, transforming the way we understood ourselves. We used to think we were separate from the other animals, and then we realized that we were descended from apes, and then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology, what we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum physicist, used to say that it comes from bit, okay? Bits as in bits of computer data, like data comes before matter. Description precedes itness, right? The verbs are verbing. We used to think the Earth was the center of the universe. We used to think, all these like erroneous consensus realities that we had agreed upon that were smashed by science, transforming the way we understood ourselves. We used to think we were separate from the other animals, and then we realized that we were descended from apes, and then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology, what we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum physicist, used to say that it comes from bit, okay? Bits as in bits of computer data, like data comes before matter. Description precedes itness, right?
As individual human beings. We think back to our childhoods. Some of us don't want to think back to our childhoods. We might want to think back to our university years. It's not just individuals, though, that experience nostalgia. It's also true that societies can experience it. Religions can experience it. And when nostalgia becomes political, it becomes quite dangerous, I think. The revolutionary mind and the reactionary mind are actually mirror images of each other. The revolutionary has a theory of history, and the theory of history is that at a certain moment there will be a break in history, everything will change, and then it will get better. The idea we're going to go back to some imaginary past or semi-imaginary past, we're going to apply Sharia law, and once we do, everything in the world will be fine. But the other thing a nostalgic reactionary mind can do is to say that we can't go back. But the present is unacceptable. Therefore, we must leap over the present and create a future that is an improved version of the past. And fascism is a perfect example of that thought. That thought that things were better in the past, but we can't undo our modern civilization, so we're going to create a hyper-modern civilization that will have some of the qualities we imagined were in the past. Strength, national unity, a pure race. It's very important that we distinguish liberals and conservatives on the one hand, and revolutionaries and reactionaries on the other hand. What distinguishes revolutionaries and reactionaries is a philosophy of history. What distinguishes a liberal from a conservative is a different philosophy of human nature. So a conservative view of human nature is that human beings come into a world that they have not created. You grow up in a society, you pick up the language of that society, you pick up the morality of that society, and what you are.
Animals, and then we realized that we were descended from apes, you know, and then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology, what we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum physicist, used to say that it comes from bit. Okay, bits as in bits of computer data, like data comes before matter. Description precedes itness, right? The verbs are verbing all by themselves without a need to introduce nouns, I believe was the quote. This idea that matter acts, but there are no actors acting upon the action. The verbs are verbing all.
Work and family. We often have two phrases that we use to describe what we do. We pitch in and we help out. And I'm going to propose something a little bit more radical. One word: share. Because here's what the data show. When men share housework and childcare, their children do better in school. Their children have lower rates of absenteeism, higher rates of achievement. They are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. They are less likely to see a child psychiatrist. They are less likely to be put on medication. So when men share housework and childcare, their children are happier and healthier. And men want this. When men share housework and childcare, their wives are happier. Well, duh.
We studied a general counsel in a pharmaceutical company who had to figure out how to get the outside lawyers, 19 competitors, to collaborate and innovate. We studied the head of marketing at a German automaker, where fundamentally they believed that it was the design engineers, not the marketeers, who were allowed to be innovative. We also studied Vineet Nair at HCL Technologies, an Indian outsourcing company. When we met Vineet, his company was about, in his words, to become irrelevant. We watched as he turned that company and really into a global dynamo of IT innovation. At HCL Technologies, like at many companies, the leaders had learned to see their role as setting direction and making sure that no one deviated from it. What he did is tell
travels along, we can see its digital certificate or token move on the blockchain, adding value as it goes. This is a whole new world in terms of our visibility. So I've talked about how blockchains can lower our uncertainties about identity and how they change what we mean about transparency in long distances and complex trades, like in a supply chain. The last uncertainty that we often face is one of the most open-ended, and it's reneging. What if you don't send me the smartphone? Can I get my money back? Blockchains allow us to write code, binding contracts between individuals, and then guarantee that those contracts will bear out.
And the day we met, we were passing each other in Azadi Square and we bumped shoulders. And I turned to apologize, and she, without saying hello or introducing herself or anything, said, "Well, why do you think we just didn't pass through each other?" And first of all, I thought, who the hell are you? But second, the question annoyed me because the answer is so simple. I said, we didn't pass through each other because elementary particles have mass, and because the space between elementary particles is filled with the binding energy that also has the properties of mass, and we've known that for 800 years. She must have been in one of those moods where she likes to mess with strangers, or maybe she was just flirting with me, because she looked at me and said, "I thought you'd say that."
Then maybe we can use an asparagus to form new connections between the ends of damaged and severed nerves, or maybe even the spinal cord. Now, don't get me wrong, this is exceptionally challenging and really hard work to do, and we are not the only ones working on this, but we are the only ones using an asparagus. And right now, we've got really promising pilot data, and we're working with tissue engineers and neurosurgeons to find out what's actually possible. So listen, all of the work I've shown you, the stuff that I've built that's like all around me on this stage, and the other projects my lab is involved in, are all a direct result of me playing with your garbage. Play is a key part.
We ended up with pages and pages and pages of field notes that we analyzed to look for patterns in what our leaders did. The bottom line, if we want to build organizations that can innovate time and again, we must unlearn our conventional notions of leadership. Leading innovation is not about creating a vision and inspiring others to execute it. Well, what do we mean by innovation? An innovation is anything that is both new and useful. It can be a product or service, it can be incremental, or it can be breakthrough. We have a pretty inclusive definition. How many of you recognize this man? Put your hands up. Keep your hands up if you know who this is. How about
forms of it that we face in almost all of our everyday transactions, where blockchains can play a role? We face uncertainties like not knowing who we're dealing with, not having visibility into a transaction, and not having recourse if things go wrong. So let's take the first example, not knowing who we're dealing with. Say I want to buy a used smartphone on eBay. The first thing I'm going to do is look up who I'm buying from. Are they a power user? Do they have great reviews and ratings? Or do they have no profile at all? Reviews, ratings, check marks, these are the attestations about our identities that we cobble together today and use to lower uncertainty about who we're dealing with. But the problem is they're very fragmented.
Would mean me test and treat every pregnant woman in the world. That would do the job. But it's just not practical. So instead, we target those areas where HIV rates are the highest. We know in certain countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we can test and treat pregnant women where rates are highest. This precision approach to a public health problem has cut by nearly half HIV transmission from mothers to baby in the last 5 years. Screening pregnant women in certain areas in the developing world is a powerful example of how
We need leaders who really desire to be creative change agents. And, you know, I look at business, and I often say this in our company. I'm a child of the 70s. I don't believe that people who grew up in the 70s forgot about the civil rights movement, forgot about the Vietnam War, don't care about what happens in society. I think at the end of the day, the whole reason why I got into business is it was really a choice at that time when I was growing up. One of my best friends still is Jeff Canada, who founded Harlem Children's Zone, and we worked on his first
You're on the board,
plan.
and you're doing a lot of stuff there.
And what Jeff and I talked about was, I said, I think actually business to me is the next frontier for the civil rights movement. Employees. And so we actually had to leave our building for around 11 months. We were in a 3-state area, and it took me a day and a half to get back. We actually had to charter a plane. We couldn't use our own company plane. And we got back to New Jersey, where we were set up on a temporary basis. And I remember just standing up on a table and talking about the fact that this company was going to survive, that they were going to survive. I immediately, that day, went to the victims' families and met with them, which was a really, we should never lose focus of that objective to grow.
So what was the low point in this? When your volumes went to?
Oh yeah,
everything
the volumes went negative. Credit losses went up. So you talk about the affluent segment. Well, there were a lot of people in Florida and California, very wealthy people who had no credit problems.
Formerly affluent.
That's right, who had serious problems. Now, what's important is to look for what were the signs that we would survive and get that out to the company. So the first thing that we decided literally in a matter of days is that we were going to have to go out and take deposits. Here's where the experts came back in and they said, look, you used to be a full-fledged diversified financial services company, but I said that we have no choice. The reality is, in a very short period of time, in a matter of months, we raised around $10 to $15 billion of deposits, and in 12 months,
and where did that come
we raised over 25.
25 billion.
We basically did CDs.
Okay.
We did not have time to do any advertising. We went to third-party brokers, but the name, our name, American Express, people trusted despite the fact that everything was tumbling down.
And you needed this cash for a liquidity perspective.
Absolutely.
Liquidity is life in your business.
Is king. As I explained at the end of the day to our organization down through all levels, if you don't have the money to pay the bills, you got a big problem. People understood what stayed liquid.
I know this as DNR.
In a way which actually can make our economy stronger. We can. If we just had a fair tax system to tax capital at the same rate that we tax ordinary individuals, if we just made those people in that upper 1% pay their fair share of the taxes, they get 22.5% of the income, well, let's make sure that they pay a commensurate part of our income tax. If we had taxes that would be designed to improve our environment. If we...
You mean about taxing pollution?
Taxing pollution.
Carbon emissions.
A general principle that we've known for a long time. A lot better to tax bad things than good things. Rather than tax people who work, let's shift some of that burden into...
We raised over 25.
25 billion.
We basically did CDs.
Okay.
We did not have time to do any advertising. We went to third-party brokers, but the name, our name, American Express, people trusted despite the fact that everything was tumbling down.
And you needed this cash for a liquidity perspective.
Absolutely.
Liquidity is life in your business.
Is king. As I explained at the end of the day to our organization down through all levels, if you don't have the money to pay the bills, you got a big problem. people understood what stayed liquid.
I know this as DNR OOC, do not run out of cash.
That's right. That's right. So that was absolutely critical. The second thing after 2 or 3 months is we looked to see if we were losing customers. And in fact, we weren't. Spending.
Let me hear. Well, let me just give you one example that we were talking about before. Right now, we have special tax provisions for capital gains. If we had had less encouragement to so much financial transactions, you know, the high-frequency trade, all those kind of things that don't create any value for our society, but we subsidize them implicitly by the advantages that the tax system gives. So if we had a tax system that discouraged some of this kind of excessive financial activity, we actually taxed not only environmental pollution, but corporations.
So we have a tax code that encourages companies to send their profits abroad, to send jobs abroad, and to reward owners of their company whose money may not come back to the United States.
It doesn't make any sense, you might say. And the fact it doesn't, you know, one of the reasons I wrote the paper was, you know, there's a lot of discussion going on about we have a budget deficit. And we have to slash this and slash that and cut back education and cut back research, things that will make our economy stronger, cut back infrastructure. And I think that's counterproductive. It's weakening our economy. But the point I make in this paper is it would be easy for us.
Very difficult for us to come back. We came back stronger than ever as a company.
So I want to sort of use that to bridge to 2008. Okay. So you're in Manhattan, you're in the center of all of this, and Austin can help with the timing. Basically what happens is you have a series of real estate bubble crashes, you have Bear Stearns and so forth, and there's a point in September where, I'll get the technical term wrong, but the dollar settlement market stops working.
Right. Commercial paper market collapsed.
Is that correct, Austin? So at that point, you face another possibility of the entire company literally going into a black hole, right? Basically, because you can't do your daily work.
One of the things we're interested in is understanding what are the capabilities of quantum information processing, what would we be able to do when we build quantum computers, and we'd like to understand whether we can really build scalable systems that could solve hard problems. And I think that's already a compelling research agenda on its own, but I'm not really an engineer, I'm a theoretical physicist, so I think the things that I find most interesting are the possible ways in which our ideas about quantum computing and about quantum information can help us understand other problems in physics. One example is understanding the different phases or types of quantum matter. We know if we have a quantum system of many parts.
In California, we don't have a water problem as much as we have an agriculture problem. And so what I've come up against time and time again, I even had a conversation about this with Al Gore years ago before he became a vegan. And I asked him, I said, in An Inconvenient Truth, why didn't you talk about animal production? Because according to the United Nations, 25% of climate change comes from animal production. That's more than every car, bus, boat, truck, plane on the planet. And Al Gore didn't mention it. And he was so honest. He looked me in the eye and he said, that's because it's too inconvenient of a truth for most people. And I keep coming up against that, is like environmentalists, progressive, people who care about the earth still want to hold on to these old actions that are destroying the earth. And you can't do both. Like you can't. And from Move On, and we were all gathered around a big screen TV watching the election results come in and slowly realizing that we had lost the election. And people started crying. and people started getting so emotional. And I was upset, but then I had this sort of quasi-epiphany, and I realized ultimately what right now we're responding to pixels turning on and off and sound coming out of a small speaker. And I had this thought, which was, and I know one of the ways that we define mental illness is people who respond to things that are some air. You're like, oh, they're crazy because there's nothing in the air that they're actually screaming at. They're imagining things. And I think that, again, from an almost like evolution, tradition and habit than we are with a better way of doing things.
Right. Well, it was out of California that Congressman Waxman, in collaboration with Massachusetts Congressman Ed Markey, now Senator Ed Markey, developed a carbon tax platform that, in the wake of the healthcare reform passage, fell flat on its face.
It's a lot easier to prevent a problem than fix a huge problem once it happens.
Where do you want your mark to be? Until we stop harming all other beings, we're still savages. That was our third president, Thomas Jefferson. And then, about 100 years later, the love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. And that was Charles Darwin. Moby also said, it's sad when people see music as a product or a means to an end. And I found that compelling because he says music is perfect in and of itself, beautiful in and of itself. Now I ask certainly for the, but what about for society, for someone who concerns himself so much with society? Moby, if it's still capable,
but I think we need to do it like we did it for HIV/AIDS, which is to work from the bottom up. Start with fundamental research, then translate that research into new therapeutics for our patients. You know, you can compare that to leaving no stone unturned. The fundamental scientists, the ones who make the basic discoveries, are turning over those stones, and the translational researchers who translate those basic discoveries into new medicines for patients are looking where the stone has already been unturned.
Can there be, honestly speaking, can there be an assault on cancer without an assault or a war on carcinoma?
Realizing that we had lost the election, and people started crying, and people started getting so emotional, and I was upset, but then I had this sort of quasi-epiphany, and I realized ultimately what right now we're responding to pixels turning on and off and sound coming out of a small speaker. And I had this thought, which was, and I know this might sound a little odd, I was like, one of the ways that we define mental illness is people who respond to things that are not there. You know, so when you see someone walking down the street screaming at the air, you're like, oh, they're crazy because there's nothing in the air that they're actually screaming at. They're imagining things. And I think that, again, from an almost like evolutionary semiotic perspective, the way that we respond to media is that. Like, we sit in front of a screen.
With astonishing clarity. We were never able to do that. We handle big data We do sophisticated molecular imaging. All of these advances now allow us to really move forward and get discoveries that our scientists make in their laboratories into new therapeutics for patients. And at the same time, NIH funding has become very constrained. If you look at the NIH budget, it's about $30 billion. If one were to correct that for inflation, it would be now about $47 billion. The budget has actually declined in real dollars 25% over the last decade. And that's just unsustainable because we are losing young scientists. We are losing senior scientists who can
and transformation so that we may become more than what we are, so that we may expand, transcend, transform. And there's a wonderful idea popularized by Kevin Kelly known as finite and infinite games. Now, Finite and Infinite Games is a book by religious scholar James P. Carse, and Kevin Kelly, who co-founded Wired magazine, has praised it for altering my thinking about life, the universe, and everything. And essentially it comes down to this. Finite games are played to win or lose, right? That's familiar. That's boring, right? Infinite games are played to keep the game going. Take note of this idea. It is no longer about winning or losing.
Britain's decision to leave the European Union, the process now and what Brexit means for the UK's relationships with our European friends, but with other countries too. Partner for the US, and that will remain the case. We have a thriving economic relationship. British businesses export twice as much to the United States as they do to our next largest market, and the United States is the largest inward investor in Britain, with total American investments providing more than 1 million jobs. We need to build on that strong foundation as the UK leaves the EU. We're both strong supporters of free trade. And today we've discussed how to take forward consultations to ensure that the UK and US have the strongest possible trading relationship. And this reinforces my belief that as we
So we think of ourselves as dynamic, autonomous creatures that have agency and free will, right? We move about the world and things don't influence us because we have free will. We have the capacity to decide at every moment who we are and where we're going, right? That is what we do. Except when you look deeper, you actually find that mind, okay, that consciousness is in fact not necessarily autonomous from the world in which it dwells. In other words, consciousness is a co-production. Consciousness is a collaboration between subject and object. Professor David Lenson writes about this in his book. So consider what that means. It basically means there's not just one. But what happens when we become victims of our own success, right? Nowadays, there's so many signals competing for our attention that it's been said if you don't have ADD today, you're not paying attention. We're all kind of suffering through this paralysis of choice, this bandwidth anxiety, this fractured attention spans because we go to the supermarket and there is just too much to pick from. There's too many options. We lack the RAM to process all these possibilities. We experience instead the angst of FOMO, the angst that no matter what we choose, we're missing out on something else. And so the exhilaration, the prosperity of choice, the prosperity of freedom has become oppressive, right? Take our wounds and we can turn them into something larger that we need not have suffered in vain. Warming. But we must also realize that we have the unique capacity with these new construction kits for our reality to not just address the grand challenges of humanity, but essentially to fix the world. Not to win or lose, but to keep the game going. So let us say this, right? Let us stop playing the finite game and let us play the infinite game.
role for the UK. We can and will seize the opportunities that Brexit presents and make a success of it. We've also discussed the threat from Islamist terrorism. The UK and the US have been at the forefront of efforts to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and it's vital that we take action to degrade Daesh abroad to help keep the streets of Britain safe. And the coalition is making progress. Daesh is losing territory in Iraq and Syria, its finances have been hit, its leaders are being killed, and fighters are deserting. And in recent weeks, thanks to US efforts, Daesh in Libya have been forced backwards too. But we must not be complacent. We know these terrorists are intent on destroying our way of life, and the threat in the UK remains severe. So as we drive Daesh out of one
we address the existential panic, the ontological panic, and we push it out of our minds. Death goes from being an imminent panic to a deferrable abstraction, thoughts of mortality, and we get to inhabit some kind of eternal now, immortality now, as we smash our sense of separateness in temples of fragmentation in what Alan Harrington called a form of electronic Buddhism. It doesn't matter if it's the rave concert or Burning Man or an opera theater or an IMAX screen or an epic ocean. The point being, these vistas, these contexts, these stages become rites of passage, transformative experiences, moments of reconciliation.
To host the moderate Syrian opposition in London as we continue to support their hopes for a democratic, peaceful and inclusive Syria. And finally, we discuss the global migration crisis. Across the world, there are now over 244 million migrants, 65 million displaced people, and over 20 million refugees. This growing crisis cannot be solved by the actions of one country alone. We need an international approach which better identifies those refugees who most need support, deals more effectively with economic migrants, and does more to address the root causes of migration. This issue will be top of the agenda at the UN General Assembly later this month, and I hope we can make concrete progress to stem the flow of migration and help people in their home countries and regions. So we've had a productive meeting.
The weight of the now is so powerful that we find ourselves outside ourselves. You become what you behold, so to speak. So that our neurotic inner critic, right, the voice in our head that is nagging us, anxious about the future, or saddened by the past, paralyzed by the past, instead goes silent. And there is a grace in this moment. The weight of the now in all of its gravity and splendor, particularly in a pre-configured epic context, can serve to purge you of your angst. This is a transformative experience. I mean, I think when I come to a place like this, whenever I put myself outside myself, I am able to pierce the veil. I am able to see beyond my concerns and my...
One thing I will say is we don't make apologies for pushing a little bit harder when it comes to press access. And that's been the case from my very first state visit here. And we don't always get everything that we'd like to see, but we think it's important for us to at least stand up for those values.
And on the question you asked me about Brexit, yes, Brexit does indeed mean Brexit. On the 23rd of June, the people in the UK voted for the European Union. The government respects that decision. We respect the wishes of the... So there'll be no second referendum, no attempt to turn the clock back, no attempt to try and get out of this. The UK... I think we have a question from Jason Groves from the Daily Mail.
Between people that argue that technology is part of who we are and those that believe that technology is fundamentally unnatural and that it's a tool that's being used to ultimately destroy the world. I don't fall into that camp. I echo Kevin Kelly's ideas that stipulate that actually technology is the real skin of our species. Technology is the exterioration of our nervous system. Technology is our extended mind. I phone, therefore I am. But think about it. Technology is literally the...
Our two countries will be discussing ways in which we continue to sustain and strengthen our trade and investment ties. Here at the G20, we will continue to pursue an agenda of inclusive and sustainable growth. When it comes to security issues, under Prime Minister May, the UK has reaffirmed its strong commitment to the transatlantic security architecture. We are NATO allies. We see the world in the same way. We will continue to oppose Russian aggression in Ukraine. We will continue to counter cyber threats. We will continue to work diligently to root out terrorist networks, and will work to destroy ISIL. At a time when the international...
Because we as human beings, our greatest potential is that we have this reality distortion field. We are like Neo in the Matrix when he sees the code and he flexes his muscle and space and time warps around him. Powerful metaphor, but that's who we are. That's what we are. Night, or from night to day. In ordinary waking states, we cannot perceive the passing of the moment. And so this perception, this increased juxtaposition of day and night forces us to be more present. It forces an experience of time dilation that transforms how we perceive the moment. The moment becomes impregnated with a sense of importance, with a sense of meaningfulness. The sunset context essentially frames the moment and induces, hopefully, a transformative experience. And thus we are left with that feeling of, oh, that was really meaningful, or oh, that was really special. And we crave these moments, and we work hard for these moments, and we strive to author these moments. But a lot of times, they are right there for the taking, if only we were aware enough to open our eyes.
We're both strong supporters of free trade. And today we've discussed how to take forward consultations to ensure that the UK and US have the strongest possible trading relationship. And this reinforces my belief that as we forge a new global role for the UK, we can and will seize the opportunities that Brexit presents and make a success of it. We've also discussed the threat from Islamist terrorism. The UK and the US have been at the forefront of efforts to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and it's vital that we take action to degrade Daesh abroad to help keep the streets of Britain safe. And the coalition is making progress. Daesh is losing territory in Iraq and Syria, its finances have been hit, its leaders are being killed, and fighters are deserting. And in recent weeks, thanks to US efforts,
we have the capacity to decide at every moment who we are and where we're going, right? That is what we do. Except when you look deeper, you actually find that mind, okay, that consciousness, is in fact not necessarily autonomous from the world in which it dwells. In other words, consciousness is a co-production. Consciousness is a collaboration between subject and object. Professor David Lenson writes about this in his book. So consider what that means. It basically means there's not just one type of consciousness, right? There is this notion that it's person multiplied by place multiplied by time that reveals a garden of forking paths of possible consciousnesses, of possible entities, and that your consciousness is mediated, again, if you think about what I'm
And finally, we discuss the global migration crisis. Across the world, there are now over 244 million migrants, 65 million displaced people, and over 20 million refugees. This growing crisis cannot be solved by the actions of one country alone. We need an international approach which better identifies those refugees who most need support, deals more effectively with economic migrants, and does more to address the root causes of migration. This issue will be top of the agenda at the UN General Assembly later this month, and I hope we can make concrete progress to stem the flow of migration and help people in their home countries and regions. So we've had a productive meeting. It's been an opportunity to discuss how we respond to some of the great challenges we face.
Productive. It is true that not for the first time when we come here, there ends up being issues around security and press access. And part of the reason is because we insist on a certain approach to our press pool, for example, that other countries may not insist on. We think it's important that the press have access to the work that we're doing, that they have the ability to answer questions. And we don't leave our values and ideals behind when we take these trips.
Fear and making room. Will, right? We move about the world and things don't influence us because we have free will. We have the capacity to decide at every moment who we are and where we're going, right? That is what we do. Except when you look deeper, you actually find that mind, okay, that consciousness is in fact not necessarily autonomous from the world in which it dwells. In other words, consciousness is a co-production. Consciousness is a collaboration between subject and object. Professor David Lenson writes about this in his book. So consider what that means. It basically means there's not just one type of consciousness, right? There is this notion that it's person multiplied by place multiplied by time that reveals a garden of forking paths of possibility.
Of cessations, of hostilities to hold, we approach it with some skepticism, but it is worth trying. To the extent that there are children and women and innocent civilians who can get food and medical supplies and get some relief from the constant terror of bombings, that's worth the effort. And I think it's premature for us to say that there is a clear path forward, but there's the possibility, at least, for us to make. But if we do not get some buy-in from the Russians on reducing the violence, and our first task is making sure that we get first TPP done, but also that we move forward on the TTIP negotiations, in which we've already invested a lot of time and effort. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
comprehension, so that we may say, ah, yes, I remember what I forgot. In the words of Nisargadatta, the other world is this world rightly seen. We need to form some kind of kinship between ourselves and the unfathomable vastness of the cosmos. We are star stuff, said Carl Sagan. We are made of atoms, literally cooked in the furnaces of dying stars. And so in many ways, we are infinite. Yet as psychologist Ernest Becker wrote, we are nevertheless housed in heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying bodies, simultaneously gods and worms. And so we need a bridge, a conduit to the numinous. And perhaps no greater instrument in the history of humankind than the telescope can provide this cathartic bridge as it blasts open new tunnels between the mind and the other. Ross Anderson's dazzling essay on the James Webb Telescope reminds us
Brexit would be minimal, and we would just go ahead and start lining up a whole bunch of free trade agreements separate and apart from the EU relationship. And my simple point is that we've put great priority on, first, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, now that we have an agreement, we want to put into force, that we are also negotiating effectively with the entire EU around the Transatlantic Trade Agreement, or TTIP, and those negotiations are proceeding. And so it would not make sense for us to put those efforts aside we want to put into force, that we are also negotiating effectively with the entire EU around the Transatlantic Trade Agreement, or TTIP, and those negotiations are proceeding. And so it would not make sense for us to put those efforts aside, particularly at a time when my working assumption is that if, in fact, the people of the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union, their first priority would be to renegotiate terms of trade with the economic unit that they sell half of their goods.
My own statement with some of the figures that I gave. We have a very strong trading relationship with the United States, and we will be looking to ensure that we can maintain that strongest possible relationship into the future. And on the question that you ask about Hinkley Point, I will be doing exactly as you said indeed in your question, Jason, which is, as you know, I'll be looking at all the evidence around this issue. The way I work is that I don't just take an instant decision. I actually look at the evidence, take the advice, consider it properly, and then come to a decision. And I've been very clear that I will be doing that and will be taking a decision sometime this month.
It is absolutely true that I believe
we both believe this is an issue that we as G20 leaders cannot afford to ignore. Instead, we must all work together to spur economic growth, to boost free trade, and build a fairer economy that truly works for all.
Thank you. So we're going to take a couple of questions, starting with Andrew Beattie of AFP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I had a question on Syria, first of all. It seems like there's a deal with the Russians within reach. I was wondering, do you not think there's a risk that there's another short-lived agreement that doesn't end the war but which allows the Russians to deflect criticism at the G20 here and at the UN General Assembly? And secondly, what do you make of the kerfuffle yesterday at the airport? And for the Prime Minister, you said that Brexit means Brexit, but I wonder if you could be a bit more specific. Could you categorically rule out
opportunities? But we have a very strong, as I indicated in my own statement with some of the figures that I gave, we have a very strong trading relationship with the United States, and we will be looking to ensure that we can maintain that strongest possible relationship into the future. And on the question that you ask about Hinkley Point, I will be doing exactly as you said indeed in your question, Jason, which is, as you know, I'll be looking at all the evidence around this issue. The way I work is that I don't just take an instant decision. I actually look at the evidence, take the advice, consider it properly, and then come to a decision. And I've been very clear that I will be doing that and will be taking a decision sometime this month.
It is absolutely true.
So as we drive Daesh out of one area, we must be alert to the risk that they will seek a safe haven elsewhere, and we must work internationally to defeat their ideology of hatred and murder. And we need to support other countries in the region, helping to protect them from the threat of Daesh, and thereby protecting people home in Britain too. We must also continue to strive for a political situation in Syria. The goal remains a negotiated settlement which delivers stability for all Syrians and a government with whom we can work to defeat the terrorists. We welcome US efforts to broker an end to the violence and to help protect moderate opposition forces. It's vital that humanitarian supplies get to innocent Syrians who are in desperate need, and this afternoon I will urge President Putin to do all he can to get the aid convoys in.
Tools. I mean, think about it. Once we created stone tools, our jaws shrank. Once we discovered that fire could cook our foods, making every meal more efficient, it freed up the cognitive real estate necessary for the emergence of culture, religion, and arts. So you might say that who we are is due to the feedback loops between us and our tools, to the degree that our tools become extended appendages that even though they are not within our biological skin tissue, they are nonetheless a part of our cognitive arsenal. They are a part of us the same way a nest is a part of a bird and a spider's web is a part of a spider. It is our extended phenotype, it is who we are, it is our termites colony, it is temperature controlled, it is the extension of our mind. We have the Hubble Space Telescope blasting new tunnels between the mind and the other, as Russ Anderson says, and we look back, right? And we are the remnants of those stars that died, right? The periodic table of the elements, all of it was manufactured in the furnaces of stars. So we are dead stars looking back at ourselves, right? I mean, this idea is just astonishing. We are poetry. We are cosmic poetry. If that's not enough of a story to help you get up in the morning, then I don't know what is. The world. So when we growing of focus, right? We are told that biochemically no different than doing lots and lots of cocaine. We become addicted to the other person, and we use that as a means to dismiss the authenticity of that feeling, as a way of somehow saying it is not worthy of our attention because it's a kind of pathology. And I was reading this amazing article on brain pickings that was saying the strangest, most paradoxical thing is that there is nothing mere about being inflamed by passion, infatuation, as much as it may drive us mad, because it's a singularly potent and utterly addictive drug with the capacity to narrow our focus so spectacularly as to reduce the entirety of the world to the object of our desire. So think about that again. Infatuation narrows our focus so much.
And we need to support other countries in the region, helping to protect them from the threat of Daesh, and thereby protecting people home in Britain too. We must also continue to strive for a political situation in Syria. The goal remains a negotiated settlement which delivers stability for all Syrians and a government with whom we can work to defeat the terrorists. We welcome US efforts to broker an end to the violence and to help protect moderate opposition forces. It's vital that humanitarian supplies get to innocent Syrians who are in desperate need, and this afternoon I will urge President Putin to do all he can to get the aid convoys in and to end the indiscriminate bombing of civilians. And next week the Foreign Secretary plans to host the moderate Syrian opposition in London as we continue to support their hopes for a democratic
that we are cognitive beings.
Aggressive effort to go after what I think we all consider to be the principal threat that's emanating out of Syria. And with respect to our visit here, so far it's been extraordinarily productive. It is true that not for the first time when we come here, there ends up being issues around security and press access. And part of the reason is because we insist on a certain approach to our press pool, for example, that other countries may not insist on. We think it's important that the press. Here at the G20, we will continue to pursue an agenda of inclusive and sustainable growth. When it comes to security issues, under Prime Minister May, the UK has reaffirmed its strong commitment to the transatlantic security architecture. We are NATO allies. We see the world in the same way. We will continue to oppose Russian aggression in Ukraine. We will continue to counter cyber threats. We will continue to work diligently to root out terrorist networks, and will work to destroy ISIL. At a time when the international order is under strain, I also emphasize the degree to which United Kingdom's leadership on the world stage.
We respect the wishes of the people, and we will put that into practice. So there'll be no second referendum, no attempt to turn the clock back, no attempt to try and get out of this. The UK will be leaving the European Union. I think we have a question from Jason Groves from the Daily Mail.
Hi, it's Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Mr. President, you came to London earlier this year and urged the British people not to vote for Brexit and warned them that they'd be at the back of the queue for a trade deal if they did. Do you accept you got it wrong on Brexit, and do you regret making that threat, or are you really going to punish us for taking a democratic decision? And could I ask just quickly, I work for the Daily Mail, and could I ask just quickly whether
We become an instrument of states and creativity. But oh my God, when that happens, that is transcendence. That is to be in ecstasy, to be beside ourselves as something comes through. And that's what we're chasing.